Hi, George. How's it going, Kevin?
Kevin, nice to meet you.
George, Frank Dermody.
Frank, nice to meet you.
Okay, we are actually on now.
Okay.
Welcome to the York Daily Record Editorial Board. I'm Scott Fisher, editorial page editor, and we are here today with House Democratic leader Frank Dermody. And you are from, tell us about your district, where are you from?
I'm from outside of Pittsburgh. I live in Oakmont. There's a
Oakmont.
golf course there, and
Okay.
next year we'll have the U.S. Open. So and I have
Ooh, wow.
it's all right now. I also have two communities in Westmoreland County, New Kensington and Arnold, but mostly Allegheny County.
Welcome. And of course, we have Kevin Schreiber, who is a Democratic State House member from York.
Yes, yep, 95th District.
95th District. So we're here essentially to talk about the budget situation in Pennsylvania, and I thought you could maybe talk a little bit about what's on your mind, what's happening, what you see as proceed this out. We have a few questions, but maybe we can start with where are we right now with the budget?
Well, we're not very far, and we need to be farther along. We really do. The people of Pennsylvania expect that, and we're going to try hard. And working with Kevin. Kevin is now on the Appropriations Committee, certainly is a factor now in the budget, and they constantly meeting on these issues. But the governor ran on a platform that involved we're going to begin to adequately fund education. We're going to use at least Marcellus shale tax to get most of that done. And it's not a surprise. He won the election, and here we are in the middle of July, and we don't have a budget. And frankly, we're not very far along at all in negotiating this budget. The governor has reached out. He has tried to make some concessions and try to work with the Republican leadership, and the answer is no. And that's a hard spot to negotiate from, particularly when the priorities of the people of Pennsylvania are they want funding for education. Property taxes have gone up because of the $1 billion cut. We want to begin restoring those, and we want to, he proposed property tax relief for all Pennsylvanians. We want to make sure that happens also.
When you say that we know that this is what Pennsylvanians want, how do you know that? How do you know what Pennsylvanians want?
I think you start with the election. I mean, he won it handily, and his platform was that his campaign was all about adequately funding education and through Marcellus shales tax. Polling is clear. And I look at the priorities of people of Pennsylvania, education funding is at or near the top of every poll you ever look at. Mm-hmm. So I think those are the best indications I have that would tell all of us that those issues are what they care about. And we need to address them. We really need to address them. In this budget, we have an opportunity because with Governor Wolf as a businessman, and he was clear in his campaign and honest with the people of Pennsylvania that we have a structural budget deficit we have to solve. We've got to take care of that before we can move forward, and it's going to take revenue to do that.
I would just add into, I think obviously as Frank had said, Governor Wolf won a historic election. This was the first time that an incumbent was unseated in Pennsylvania. I think that in and of itself is at least a statement. I think he didn't hide his platform. He ran saying, his version was a severance tax and that we need to apply that to education funding. I have, said in a lot of discussions over the last couple of months, he came into office March 3rd, delivers his budget presentation. Obviously, this wasn't just his platform. He incorporated ideas that have been corporate net income tax or adopting his version of the while. So it was, I think it was less of a partisan, more of a populist. Off a historic election, that education number one issue. Put it up there at 73% of Pennsylvanians want to do a severance tax. And he is attempting to address property tax relief, which certainly we've talked about in Pennsylvania for a number of years and decades. So I think to some degree it was very much a bipartisan or nonpartisan budget, and really just more of a populist budget, saying here are things that we need to address, and hopefully through all of his efforts to provide some outreach, we'd like to think we could get a little further.
Mm-hmm. What do you say to the Republican argument? I've heard this from a number of Republicans over the last week. Oh, we won a victory over Corbett, but he didn't really win the election. Corbett lost the election because he was so unpopular. And it's not really, it wasn't his victory, it was Corbett's loss. And so it doesn't really reflect the will of the people of Pennsylvania.
Well, if he is unpopular, there's a reason he was unpopular, because every school district in the Commonwealth was forced to raise property taxes. Human services, they weren't adequately funded, and he did nothing about property taxes at all. Their four budgets, the last for the Corbett budgets, and this fifth one that they've proposed, results in taxes going up. They say no taxes are being raised. Yeah, they are. They're being raised locally. Counties and school districts are raising taxes to fund the programs that they have to, because we are not holding up our responsibility.
Now, in your chamber passed Stan Saylor's house, or his property tax reform.
We worked together with the Republicans to
Right.
get that done.
And so how did that not end up anywhere in the Republican budget? I don't understand that.
I would talk to the state senators that are involved there. There's not much will for this in the state senate that we can see to do anything about property tax relief for Pennsylvanians. And that's important. We're going to keep, that is the, priority of the governor, it's a priority of ours, and clearly a priority of the House Republicans.
That was a good demonstration of actual compromise, and I think it was very clear that if the House didn't pass something, that the dialogue would stop there, and that was back in mid-June. Whatever the form of the bill, took at that point, we knew that it was incredibly likely it may change between, then and the completion of the budget process. But the votes, we put up the votes necessary on the D and the R side. The governor, kept the dialogue alive. I think there was a clear delineation that House members, Democrat leadership, Republican leadership, want to see property tax as part of this dialogue.
So would you say that the Republicans in the House are basically said, okay, we're not going to really push this with our colleagues across the
There's a
aisle?
couple
Or
of
they
key
just-
leadership positions, and
I don't think they've abandoned it. I know that the majority leader, Dave Reed, is very anxious to get something done. This is one of his big issues, and we worked with him closely to get the votes to pass that bill over and get it over to the Senate.
Does it make sense to do it after the budget's done in the fall? Because that's another thing I've heard. Let's do the budget and then worry about property tax.
And then we'll be worried about it for the next 25 years.
right. I mean, that's really where we're, and again, the governor certainly put forth an ambitious, budget proposal. I think the structural deficit, and remove that as an item that we got to deal with year in and year out. Obviously, education funding is an issue unto itself. I think it would be nice to just finally do this. And if we're going to rip the Band-Aid off and we're going to, vote on a new philosophical approach to how our state budgets, then let's just do it now and get it over with, and then move on to some more, key issues. And if it means going back and tweaking it, year in and year out, then that's fine. I think there's an interest in just trying to finally do this.
But we need to be honest with the people of Pennsylvania, and the governor was in his campaign. He didn't shy away from the fact that we have a deficit we have to take care of. We have a structural budget deficit because of the last 4 years, and including this proposed budget by the Republicans that they passed.
Can you give us kind of a dummies version? What is the structure? I really
Just one-time budget. And now that it's a appeal to be appealed for years, that $1,000. Say we're not going to schools. Well, what do you mean? You're just not going to pay it? Yeah, of course you have to pay it. They only paid 11 months of reimbursements to hospitals. What happens to the 12 months? It's millions and millions of dollars for our local hospitals, but it's just a game. You've got to stop that. We've got to pay our bills. We've got to make sure they're paid with recurring sources of revenue. Because of the way they've budgeted the last 4 years and this proposed one, our bond rating from Wall Street keeps going down because it's costing us tens of millions. They want us. Wall Street expects us to pay our bills. We need to pay our bills, and that's what the governor wants to do.
So by a structural deficit, you mean these are costs that we have that are being paid in a sort of,
Right, and
they're not being paid, or they're being paid in an artificial one-time.
They're not being paid.
You hear, you hear, all right, we have a balanced budget. Well, it's not quite balanced because we've inflated columns on the balance sheet. We're just adjusting numbers, whether it's small games of chance and inflating projected revenue. So annually, at the end of the year, if you were actually to sort of count your pennies at the end of the year and you say, okay, well, that budget didn't turn out to be balanced, you still have an expense that you haven't paid for. Well, the state has the ability to carry those things over. We're carrying it into the next fiscal year. Well, that just continues to accumulate. On the local side, we've called it the accumulated deficit. In the city of York, we have an accumulated deficit. So it's based on a what is perceived as a balanced budget, but is balanced based on either one-time revenue transfers, dipping into the tobacco settlement fund to pull money out of here and plug it in there, and it's not responsible. And while Pennsylvanians don't always see that or hear about it because it isn't the most easiest of topics to convey, but the credit rating agencies do, and that's why we did see multiple credit downgrades over the last couple of years, because they basically get in and they look at the numbers and they have the invasive surgical audits and they say, all right, you're balancing a budget on these one-time transfers, and ultimately it just compounds. It's just like a bad credit card. So every year, even with this budget right now, the governor's office of budget estimates we have a $1.5 billion structural deficit. if we don't take care of it, and in the budget bill that was just passed by the Republicans, it will compound to nearly $3 billion, because we're not addressing that issue. And ultimately, you either have to do that by cutting more expenses, which I'm not sure there is an appetite for, as we've seen, the education cuts have just trickled down to local property tax increases, or you've got to raise revenue. And I think that's where it's responsibly balancing a budget and just speaking honest to Pennsylvanians and saying, this is something that's accumulated and we got to take care of it.
Got to be honest with them, and he has been. The governor was in his campaign.
On Monday, Scott Wagner is going to come in and sit where you're sitting right now and talk to us about the same kinds of issues. And he said over and over, we have a spending problem, not a revenue problem in Pennsylvania. We need to cut things in here.
Well, the only way the way you cut, and there's any appreciable cuts, is the school districts. It's education and human services. And, when Corbett cut Medicaid, 80,000 children were unnecessarily and improperly and illegally thrown off health care, and some of them were devastated by it, and they were all put back on at a significant cost to the Commonwealth. That's where you cut. So if he wants to cut more to education, then go back to your local school districts and see how they're going to pay for it. Now, I know he flies in a helicopter around here. You're very familiar with that, showing all these school districts. You should come and take a look at what schools are really like throughout Pennsylvania. And they say money isn't the answer, but to try to educate a kid without it. And we need to make those investments. It makes sense to make those investments. And I don't know where he's coming from to say that he wants to, the only way you can cut significant money is through human services and education, and I don't think we can afford to do that anymore. We need to invest in our kids. We need to have pre-K for every child. The statistics are clear that when you do that, those children perform better in high school and throughout life. They don't end up in jail.
Let's go back a few weeks where the Governor's Wolf original budget proposal was essentially put on the table and everybody voted against it. Can you talk about what happened there? And,
Sure.
and I'm interested in how many votes does he actually, if that proposal will be put on the table today, how many Democratic votes would there be for that?
If there's an agreement on a budget, we'll get the budget passed if that's the case. And what happened that day was, and it was a political stunt. They started by running the budget bill.
Yeah.
The budget bill. We offered 4 amendments that we needed to suspend the rules for. It gets a little complicated, but those 4 amendments were to adequately fund education, human services. I forget the other 2, but there was funding for higher ed, K through 12, and 2 other amendments. Republicans got upset because we were offering these amendments, and they then took the budget bill off the board and put up the tax bill. And we had already talked about that. We heard that the strategy was going to be, talked to the governor, there's no way we're going to engage in a political stunt. It was a stunt by them. They were just playing a game. They knew it wasn't real. We knew it wasn't real. And I told them, I asked all our guys, Kevin was one of them, vote no, we're not voting for this. And when they want to seriously negotiate and sit down and talk about a real budget, we'll put the votes together and pass it.
So to some degree, they're putting up as amendments how they're going to, the tax plan, that's incorporated into the Wolf budget. And I mean, every year we do a budget, we do a tax code, whether it's, setting the rates as the same year or adjusting them. And that's what they did. Amendment, that was the tax package, but they wouldn't the complementary spend package and how you're going to. So, when Frank says, all right, so we tried to put up an amendment that says, here's how you're going to fund education. It includes Governor Wolf. That was voted down too. So basically then they're saying, all right, into how you want to spend the money. We just want to see if you're willing to put up the votes to
Against adequate funding for education. And they don't like hearing
that. So that's where it just becomes, and again, I mean, there's posturing and then there's negotiating. That was just saying, all right, let's see if you are going to put the votes up. I think if there is an agreement and a handshake and a deal in principle that, all right, we'll put the votes for the taxes. If you're going to spend it, how we agree to, I think that'd be fine. And I think had we done that day, hopefully, God willing, there would have been an agreement between the governor's office, the House, at least the House at that point, maybe the Senate. We would have been done with it. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and it was, a little bit of a charade.
Okay. Did you have a follow-up?
How much of this often get pounded on their first budget? That, and how much of this is real disagreement over the issues?
Well, look, there's some political posturing going on for sure. Kevin's right about that. And I believe is to make sure he doesn't have a second term. And Tom Wolf's goal is to make sure he keeps his promises and, agrees with the Pennsylvanians and provides relief and and it takes care of their priorities, which means we have to have adequate funding for public education, human services are funded, we create jobs, we reduce property taxes. So, I mean, they're giving them a hard time. I mean, there's some ideology here that's going on, and that's a problem too. I mean, there's a significant number of House Republicans who don't think the government should exist, and and they don't want to tax anything.
I mean, if
So
you
you've got to, that's a problem. We have a government. We do certain core functions that we need to provide for. Education is number one.
This was, and I'd say to some degree, Jim, this isn't a new dialogue. Governor Corbett's own budget secretary, Zogby, last year had said, at some point, we need to raise revenue. However form that comes in, we need to do it. He was alluding at that point to the structural deficit, but he also said in that same press conference, but there's clearly not an appetite to do that in the legislature. So, while Governor Wolf has come in and certainly put forth a different proposal on how how we're taxing and raising revenue, but the same ideological or philosophical divide exists, that there is an unwillingness to accept the fact that government exists, we have to fund it, there are certain things that we do. Certainly you could cut your way out of it, but if you're going to do that, it's going to be painful, very painful. And it would be significantly worse than what we saw with a lot of our school districts in the past couple of years. So
Worse than painful. I mean, when you're cutting programs, test scores have gone down throughout the Commonwealth with this funding, because class sizes have gone up. 20,000 teachers and staff are out of work, and they're not in the classroom. And that makes a difference in the kids' opportunities. It really does, and it has.
So the governor's office has said repeatedly, I'm willing to compromise on this, I'm willing to give on certain things and so forth. Republicans have not been willing to give at all on
That's
anything.
correct.
You agree with that assessment? That
Yes.
There's literally no room for compromise on their side at all?
Well, so far, I hope eventually there will be, but I mean, I've sat in rooms where, no, severance tax, absolutely not. And you've read the quotes from the leaders in both sides and the Republican caucuses. That's what they've said, and that's where we're going.
Do you have a sense of how far Governor Wolf is willing to compromise? I mean, you're a House leader, you must have, you're part of these discussions, I'm assuming, so can you envision in your head where we might see some sort of a reasonable compromise from both sides on this?
Not right now, that's difficult, but I think the governor has made certain concessions already that hasn't resulted in any movement at all from the Republican side. So if they come to a table and it's clear they're serious about it, he will work with them. We all will work with them to come up with something we can all. I can go to our members and say, we need to vote for this.
I mean, I think ultimately it's, maybe less how you get there, but ultimately the objectives don't change, that he does want to fund education. I'm sure, he has a number that he has put out there. He would like to end the structural deficit and responsibly balance the budget. So there is some level of revenue needed. Again, however you arrive at that revenue, I think he would like to take care of that. And then ultimately, I believe he would like to continue to keep property tax relief as part of the dialogue. So I think, those are the three objectives that he sort of had set from the beginning on March 3rd when he introduced the budget. How you arrive at it, I'm sure, is negotiable, but I think he would still like to achieve those three objectives.
What's interesting too is the proposal, we talked about it earlier with for the business tax cuts, cutting the corporate net income tax in half. Anyone want to talk about that?
Right, I think it's, to some degree, it's been lost that, again, as I said, I mean, it was sort of a populist budget. I mean, the governor put forth a philosophical proposal that, is a bit, is certainly the way he was responding to the election, and he talked about through the election, but he's talked about cutting the CNI in half. That's been a proposal that's been around for years. Certainly Republicans have well championed that. The Chambers of Commerce have championed that and have used that as, as rhetoric, for many years, saying this harms Pennsylvania economic development. But that's been lost in the dialogue. Same with property tax relief.
Do you think that we would get a stopgap budget in place for some essential services that both sides could agree on if this kind of drags on?
And I think that's difficult. There are certainly, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, the services that are health and safety, narrow definition that the courts have ruled under previous impasses that has to be taken care of. I think a stopgap of any other sort probably is not in the offing.
Could you give us kind of a sense of like and it doesn't have to be exact, but a timeline of what happens if there's no budget agreement? Like when do people start feeling certain?
I think school
School
districts will start
districts.
feeling pain in the middle of August.
In the
Yeah.
middle of August.
The sooner, the closer you get to schools having to open, I mean, I think that's when this becomes, a much larger looming issue, and I think it's just bad, it's bad governing, it's bad politics, it's bad for everyone. If you start having school districts that say in a couple weeks they can't open their doors.
And I think County Human Services will feel it about the same time, and that'll be significant.
These are welfare payments,
Nonprofits,
things
maybe,
like
well,
that.
it would be, mental health
Children and
care,
youth.
children and youth issues, the things, the programs that the Commonwealth helps fund,
Mhm.
would start feeling it.
Right,
Police
so-
are kind of off the table though, right? You were just
Yeah.
saying that that's a help, that's a safety
State police, those
issue.
types of
Right.
things would have to be taken
And
care of.
remember, that's state police on the state side, but then also on the local municipal protection too, for some of the municipalities. Red Line, one of them, that where the state police provides that
Oh,
service
yeah,
locally.
Sure. How does that happen though? Is it basically the appropriations for those agencies are simply forced by the law, or how does that?
That's a good question, I'll have to call the treasurer. I'm not sure either.
Okay.
It might, I don't know.
Yeah, I
mean,
don't-
if it's
I
a
don't
tax
like-
anticipation note, or if
They
there's cash
may
flow.
do some of that, we'll find out.
Revenues continuing to accrue.
Yeah, revenue's coming in, absolutely, there is still revenue coming in, we're just not appropriating it.
Okay. Ed, did you have any questions? I know you've been following these issues.
Yeah, I mean, just
closely.
when it comes to the how many people would vote for Governor Wolf's taxes and the budget, the whole package. I mean, I think Republicans have said they think only half of the Democratic caucus is in support of what the plan as the governor has outlined it. I mean,
Look, they can't count very well on our side, okay? Just to take it from me, they just can't count very well on our side. I've heard that stuff too. Look, if we have an agreement, and it includes revenue, and which I think it has to, we'll make sure it gets to the governor's desk. I mean, it's going to take, obviously, there's only 80 of us right now,
Right.
so we're going to need Republican votes. I don't like that very much, but that's where the reality. So we're going to need, whatever, it's going to have to be an agreement. We're going to have to get Republican votes to pass the budget.
and then when you talked about credit downgrades, I believe the rating agencies have also talked about the pension cost as well, and when they credit downgrade, the 401k shift for new employees.
He voted a pension bill, vetoed a pension bill that was, many aspects of it just didn't make sense.
Mhm. I mean, do you think there are aspects of that could be incorporated into a final deal? Or do you
I
there's
think, and I think we're fairly close on getting an agreement on many of those things. But I don't, the 401, if there's a 401k component, we'll see. But what they passed doesn't cost money. And that's for real, it does cost us money. It doesn't have any short-term savings for the budget, destroys the system over time, which I hope isn't their goal. But there's a way to preserve this and make this work for current employees and new employees so that there is an affordable pension plan that preserves retirement security.
I mean, what do you see that compromise like? What could that look like? A compromise on pension?
We're not there yet, but they're negotiating it right now. The governor has been involved, and I think we're pretty close.
How about liquor privatization? Obviously, that's a major goal of the Republican caucus side.
Major goal of Mike Turzai.
Well, I'll just
Well, no, I'm
say.
serious about that. The Senate, really had that bill last time. I mean, they voted for this thing now because they knew the governor was going to veto it. I mean, it's a bad bill they sent over. The chairman of the Republican chairman of the Liquor Committee over in the Senate, after it passed, said this is a bad bill and it's going to raise prices. So it's not going to be that bill that's there, but we're absolutely willing to talk to them about significantly increasing consumer convenience.
What do you mean by that? Because, I mean,
Can we get wine in grocery stores, those types of things? I
Okay.
think there's ways to
Stores
work
within
things
stores,
out.
yeah.
I mean, there's ways to do this, I think, that we can protect jobs. And as the governor has said, I'm not for it, but if you're a business person, you have an asset, you want to maximize the value of that asset before you sell it. And so even if you think it's a good idea to sell these things, they let them deteriorate. We can fix it. He has a great plan to fix them too. So let's do that. But I'm for preserving the jobs. I'm for absolutely increasing consumer convenience in ways that I think everybody will be satisfied. I think we can get there.
I think people tend to forget, that if consumer convenience is, the prime issue that is used for the impetus for privatization, people tend to forget that the General Assembly sets the rules with which they work, with which the liquor system works. If it means expanding hours, which was done, several years ago, we expanded to some Sunday hours, and so if it means expanding hours, if it means doing the store within a store locations, those are all things that can be done right now, and those are things that even Governor Wolf had included in his liquor modernization.
But even those things are still like Rube Goldberg machines. So you can buy beer at the Y's over here right off of Greenbrier.
Yeah.
But you can't just go buy it and check it out. You have to buy it in one spot and then go else and check out your groceries in another spot. It just seems stupid. Why do we have to have this sort of backward system in Pennsylvania? Why can't we just have a place like other states have where you can go and buy any amount of alcohol of any type that you want in one location? Why is that
It's
such a hard
complicated.
thing to get?
It's complicated, but I also think we have 5,000 jobs to worry about here, and they're paid for. There's no taxpayers' dollars there. That's all done by people who buy liquor and wine. And licensing, enforcement, all of that is taken care of, plus a significant bit of revenue to the Commonwealth every single year, and it's recurring revenue.
Most of that's from taxes though, right? Is most of that revenue from taxes?
Well, we tax it, but we also, our pricing is very competitive. Yeah, we tax it, we ought to tax it. We should tax it some more. People who buy booze pay tax. You wanted to have a drink, it's going to cost you a little bit. I mean, but by the same token, we want to make sure that it's adequately, they have control, and we do a good job at that. And pricing is competitive. We can make it better, and we can save those jobs. And I think that's important too. Those are family-sustaining jobs. They have families. They have, and they get health care and a pension. They don't become millionaires. Don't get me wrong, but there's something to be said for at least making sure that those folks are looked out for, taken care of.
Okay, but and no disrespect for the clerks and folks
Okay.
that do that. Don't get me wrong, but the job they do is really not any significantly different than any other retail clerking type position. Why should they be paid and get so much better benefits than people who work in the Bon-Ton or some other type store where it's essentially a retail position?
Well, they have a lot more responsibility than they have at the Bon-Ton, I would think, too. I mean, there's no issue with underage sales to minors or anything else there. They've got to be careful. And, state stores don't sell to minors. They lose their job if they do. We can,
But
we're willing, we're
people,
going to work with
people
this.
who don't have any responsibility, like people who sell beer, they're not state employees.
No, they're not.
And
They also have, and the other issue that you talked about too is the licensing issue and people who have made investments in licenses for those types of areas. It's an issue about devaluing their ability to survive too, and it's complicated because most of the beer guys did not support any of this privatization issue because their businesses and their licenses were implicated. And for many of them, their small businesses, it's their life, that's all they have. So it's a difficult issue, but we are absolutely willing to work with the Republicans to make the situation better. I'm not for selling the state stores, right? I'm not for selling the wholesale.
okay.
I mean, the governor had a pretty good proposal to go out and buy for other states. We could make a huge bundle. We could buy probably for the state of, we're the largest purchaser of alcohol in the world. We could probably buy for Ohio, sell it back to them. They'd make money, we'd make money, and they could still be competitive. So, he's a businessman.
I think it's at least, looking at it as an asset, and whether, we hear it all together frequently that we need to run government like a business. Even in this, plan for privatization, it was not a good business decision. It was, a hasty fire sale. It was devaluing the asset value. It was selling it without a real valuation either. I mean, Governor Corbett had a valuation done a couple of years ago. The projection was different than what was included in the budget. I think it was
$200 million
Yeah.
one time. And it's gone from $4 billion to $200 million.
Right.
So the smoke and mirrors and the phony baloney stuff is out there. Who knows what it's really worth? But I think this governor is the business experience. At least it makes sense to me to maximize the asset before if you're going to go sell it. Maximize the word, I guess.
What kind of prospects are you seeing to increase your numbers in your house next year?
Well, I hope they're going to improve it. We're working real hard at that. We have a special elections August 4th and August 11th, and there's 4 seats up in the air, and I think we should have a shot at winning all 4, and then we need to increase our numbers, and we're working hard to do that. And we have districts throughout the state that will be very competitive, and we have already recruiting good candidates. So we're working hard at it. We've got good candidates in 3 or 4 seats that will be very, very close. And 2016 should be a better year for Democrats. It'll be a presidential year, and it will help us.
You mentioned a little bit earlier the sort of, we talked a little bit about the mandate and so forth, and a lot of people say, well, the Republicans have sort of historic numbers in the General Assembly.
They do.
And others have pointed out that a lot of that comes from gerrymandering.
I was
and-
just going to say the maps.
yeah, the maps. What, if any, efforts are there going on right now to sort of change that process? Is there any work on that front?
Well, the Supreme Court election is certainly a big decider of that too.
That'll have a huge impact on the maps. I mean, our system is in our state constitution. That makes it somewhat different than what happened, I think, in Arizona.
Right.
Where that difference was made, because there was just a recent court case that said they could change their commission. So we have what's called a commission, only the leaders from the four caucuses sit on it, and if we can't agree on the fourth, the Supreme Court picks.
Right.
Still partisan.
So there's not a whole lot discussion out there. We'd have to change the Constitution
Right.
and change the way we do it now. I haven't heard a whole lot of talk about it right now. We're just working hard to try to elect some Democrats to the Supreme Court.
I think, I mean, ultimately at the root of it though, it still gets back to the fact that we need to do a better job in America and Pennsylvania and just, making voting easier for one thing.
Right.
Well, and you sponsored legislation
Yes,
to do
right,
that?
right. I mean, we've tried, we have a package of bills that would be voting reform. We have a Department of State that, I don't want to put them on, on the spot, but I know they have had an interest in the package of legislation that's out there right now. I believe the Department of State was making a recommendation to the governor at some point on things that the DOS can do right now to modernize, how Pennsylvanians have elections and all of the costs that are incurred in elections. So I think ultimately it still gets back to making it easier to vote. We still have to do a better job of connecting to the public on why voting is important, and obviously,
And
you
my voting
guys.
for Democrats is important.
And then,
No,
you
we need to
have.
make it, but clearly we need to do some messaging out there, and we are doing that.
Right. I mean, you guys had a great editorial leading up to the November election. I think it was right before the November election. Again, just reminding folks that these are important elections, even on the off-year elections. That, these are the folks that are making decisions that impact your life every day.
But if you look at what's going on, you
Hard
talk
sell,
about
though.
suppressing.
Yeah.
It's a tough sell, but look, you want to talk about suppressing the vote. We've had a special elections on March 3rd, August 4th, and August 11th. Now, if you really wanted to have turnout, wouldn't you hold the March one on the primary day? If you really wanted to encourage voters to come out, I mean, these are cynical folks we're dealing with
Right,
here.
we had something like that here in
With
York County.
Senator
with
Wagner.
Wagner's election, it's
Yeah.
incredible. So they don't do it on the
Burnley.
primary, and the other one, but November, August 4th, we have to open up a booth down at the shore, for crying out loud, to get voters. No, I'm serious, it's wrong, really, and it's all
It's a
factor
game.
of trying to discourage turnout.
We talked about the reforming the districting system. Any other sort of essential reforms that you're interested in working on? Things like gift bans for lawmakers, ethics
Well,
law.
there's
improvements,
always
those
concern
kinds of
about
things?
that, but we have a gift ban now in place at the House rules. And so there's one in place right now, our House rules, and we've changed that, we just amended those
Yeah.
rules to include that. So if there's proposals for a statutory one, that's fine, but it's absolutely, there's a gift ban in the House rules right now. And I think that's important. I mean, people need to have some confidence in what we're doing down here, and that we're abiding by the rules, and we will.
I think this is separate, of that nature, but I think on the municipal side, I mean, I think having Governor Wolf in, to the Rusk report, him being chair of Better York, I think, if any governor recognizes the challenge that we have with her municipal fragmentation in Pennsylvania, it's him. Obviously, there's a lot of tough sell in that one too. Municipal pension reform may be, one of those issues is a test on that one. Eugene's recent report, or Auditor General's recent report, the governor's office has said, they want to get through the budget and then sort of turn their attention to that. But I think ultimately, with the next 7.5 years of Governor Wolf, hopefully we can focus on.
7.5.
Yeah, it was just like how I did that, subliminal.
We believe.
But it would be wonderful to, try to tackle some of those underlying policy issues. And we were having a conversation about Governor Rendell, before this, and just talking about economic development. He was great for economic development. He was a best friend of small cities in Pennsylvania. But, we didn't attack the underlying issues that are hamstringing these small cities. And that's going to the root issues in policy. It's less about, checks and RACP and brick and mortar. We need to do a better job of trying to figure out why these municipalities are. Ultimately, the issue is decades of service in this capacity, in this realm. try to turn our attention to some of that too.
You think about, I'll have to say that when he was elected, we thought, yeah, that would be a good thing, help from its suburban neighbors and be from the capital, exactly what he plans to do to help cities. Can you make sense? It's like, what is the plan?
He's made some proposals for economic programs at DCED to adequately fund them. That's why this budget is so important, and those proposals have a huge impact on small cities, third-class cities. So those are the areas where he needs to get a start, though, because they got decimated over the last 4 years.
Yeah, obviously I spent the last several years as economic development director. I mean, if you look right now at what he's proposed to do, that in the 6 months of Governor Wolf, if what he has proposed could come true, it would move the needle for the city of York. First and foremost with the school district
property
itself.
tax.
Right, the property. I mean, obviously, what he's trying to do, I think, is bring some level of equilibrium to the state, and try to reduce the level of disparity between
Adequately funding the
school
formula.
districts.
Right.
And we have 500 different school districts, 500 different tax rates. Obviously it's 5 times over in municipalities with 2,500 municipalities. I think bringing some level of equilibrium and parity so that you don't have these concentrated areas where the tax rate is exorbitantly high. They can't raise enough revenue to provide the services that they have to provide to make these, good areas. And I think ultimately at its core, economic development is simply investor confidence. You cut the tax rate in the city, there is a plethora, there are any number of people lining up to invest in the city. And we're at a time in our country where there is a national trend of moving back into cities. So I think right now, if we had some version of property tax relief, and what Governor Wolf had proposed would be about a 65% cumulative tax reduction for city homeowners, you move the needle on the school district with all the attention he's given the recovery process, then you're giving cities in Pennsylvania a fighting chance. And I think looking at it from the economic perspective, not just social justice and that all of those other reasons that we should be doing this, but if you look at it just from the commercial capacity of all of these cities throughout Pennsylvania, not just Philly and Pittsburgh, but all of these tremendous commercial engines for their respective counties, it only makes perspective to do some of these things. And at its core, it's just trying to bring some level of equilibrium and reduce disparity.
York seems to be sort of catching a little bit of a wave right now with all the Royal Square
It's
development. And are you want to take credit for laying the groundwork for that, or is you said it's a trend? Like people were kind of there seems to be this like I want to get back into a walkable community where I can. Do the things I
Take some credit.
Any politician takes it now. I always used to, whenever I was economic development director, I'd have to go out and do these PowerPoint presentations. My first slide was always look at the last decade. And the last decade, we had, the last time I had that PowerPoint up, it was $350 million in public-private partnership investment in the city of York. That's a huge number for a 10-year period for a small city. That's definitely not static. So I think it's important to always, take the holistic view and say, all right, urban revitalization it's nitty-gritty and it's forward and one step back, but you have it complemented by a generation that's coming online now that's getting out of college that wants to live in cities, that grew up, we always joke, they grew up watching Friends and Seinfeld that glorified cities, versus if you look at the movies in the 80s, those cities weren't necessarily portrayed well. And it's funny too, because we always name suburban communities after what we tore down to build them there. There's a suburban residential McMansion area called Tall Trees, and there's no tall trees. So we name them after what we tore down. But if you look at the old adage of Back to the Future, Marty McFly in the 50s, it's a gorgeous city, it's pristine. He goes back to the 80s, it's not that nice. Then you get into the 90s and you see Seinfeld and Friends and Sex and the City, and it glorifies the city. You have a generation of young people that grew up in the suburbs that want to move back into cities. That's what we need to capture. And we're silly if we don't, because Pennsylvania has all of these really incredible small cities, and we're missing this national wave of people that want to live in them, want to locate businesses in them, because of our archaic structure of government and how we structure municipal governments in PA.
I live in Aslan Heights and there's no talking lions. I'm like, what the heck,
See?
right?
Right?
Yeah, what's up with
And they used to be there, Scott.
It used to be Narnia, but now it's not.
On the municipalities, I think it was in April, Democratic mayor sent out a letter asking where are the Democrats. Where are your members on?
On the municipal pension issue.
Especially,
Yeah, I had a
especially Act
discussion-
111 reform.
I had a discussion with Mayor Peduto about that.
Mhm.
I had them all in my office a year ago, told them we are absolutely willing to work with them on municipal pension reform. We need to do that. Opening up Act 120 is a real problem, but there are other things we can do and want to do. We voted on a bill, for instance, in Allegheny County, there was a spiking issue with their pension plan, and we took care of that. And the letter was upsetting because it's not accurate. So we are absolutely willing to work with them. We met with the governor right after that, and the governor appointed the commission with you, running it, and nations back, and we'll see that we can. So that letter was a mistake.
Under the radar that hasn't gotten the attention it deserves. But that's city government as a whole across Pennsylvania. And when you're starving, a crumb looks good. And that's what it was for the last 4 years. They had a governor that really didn't do much in the way of anything for city, for the health and vibrancy of our small cities. We have that now. And that's, we have to work with Governor Wolf and try to craft whatever.
I have a problem with the letter, yeah, I do. The letter was a mistake, it wasn't accurate. To suggest that we could do something, they're in control of everything for 4 years, and they had the governor. And they're blaming, we didn't do anything? We absolutely did, give me a break. No, it was wrong, it was a mistake, and it wasn't accurate. They understand that now.
When
You
it
can
comes-
tell I pointed it out to them.
When it comes to Act 111, I mean, is there openness to
It's
to
a real,
change that?
it's a real problem.
And would
It's
you
going to be
work-
most difficult. I mean, we'll find ways to solve the problem. I don't know what Act 111 will cause. It's a difficult one to deal with, and it opens up a myriad of other issues. So I want to just target their issue, and we will.
I guess what are other issues is opening that back?
Well, it opens up all over the place. You've got police, firefighters, you've got across the state teachers. It's a real, causes some significant issues that I think we don't need to do it. I think we can solve this problem without going through
I mean,
that.
even some of Eugene DePasquale's recommendations wouldn't necessarily require opening up Act 111, but it still addresses some of the long-term structural shifts on the pension side. It looks at how pensions are negotiated, and it also then, when all of that is said and done, looks at how the state aid is provided. And that's another issue where, we provide state aid to the municipalities for their MMO payments, for their pension payments, and that formula benefits suburban communities over urban communities. And there again is another level of disparity, inequity. You have some of these municipal pension funds that receive state aid that pays their entire MMO, whereas you look at the city of York, it's an MMO, I'm going to ballpark it, it's around $8 million, and they get $1 million in state aid. So there again is some inherent discrepancy in how we have our state law that favors certain communities over others, and that's ultimately what we need to try to bring some equilibrium to.
Okay, well, do you have
I have
other
actually
questions?
another- it's not
Just quickly.
Independent Fiscal Office, they said by 2018 the governor's natural gas extraction tax proposal would be the highest or one of the highest in the nation. That's not counting the floor, not even count, that's by 2018, so one
His proposal would be one of the highest.
taxes in the nation, because he doesn't allow post-production cost deductions. And I mean, what are your thoughts about what that does to Pennsylvania's competitiveness, and do you think there's room to reduce that in the negotiations?
Certainly there's room to negotiate. Not much has taken place so far, I don't want to say that, but there's room to negotiate. We'll be competitive with West Virginia and Ohio no matter what we do. And we'll see what happens. But yeah, sure, there's room to negotiate. I don't think, if it's one of the highest, it will not be the highest, and we're still working on it.
And just where do things stand, not specifically this, but where do things stand with negotiations right now? I met with the governor yesterday, I think I read, the Democratic
We've
leader.
been meeting with the governor, yes, but we met with him this week, and it was just the Democratic leaders. We met with the Republican leaders also. We're not very far. We have work to do.
What do you expect to happen next week?
No, not much. We'll come back in Tuesday and Wednesday. We'll do some bills that were still outstanding when we left, so there's some cleanup bills that come, but I don't think there'll be a budget finalized next week.
Do you think we're going to have to get into a position where people are starting to hurt before this gets done?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would probably
Do you
look
think
like...
it's going to go to that, like, in
I
August,
think so. I mean,
September?
I think it'll be in August, I do, because it's been very slow so far. So I think August is realistic.
Are members still being paid during this?
Yes, the paychecks are available, yes.
Okay.
That happens over time, my first year was the budget and pass in '91. All right, and over time, there have been a few lawsuits that have been involved with, not involving the members, but involving state employees about their paychecks and how that happens. So it's worked out that if you show up, if you go to work, you get paid. Isn't that right, Bill, as the court cases are saying? So paychecks will be available.
Do you think that would change it? Would that?
That could change over time. We could run out of money, the caucuses could run out of money.
Well, isn't that why you have the contingency fund?
That's why we had one, and then we don't have one anymore.
None at all, or I know.
Or
it was-
very little, no.
Corbett made you spend it down,
Well,
right?
Corbett took millions and millions, and then he blue-lined us. He blue-lined the Senate worse than he did us his last budget. And then over the last 4 years, historically, our caucus revenues, our appropriations been split 50-50 between the Democrats and Republicans, no matter what the majority was. And over the last 4 years, Turzai changed that his first term. He became the majority leader, and
Made it proportional.
he made it proportional, so we received, $33 million less. Now, understanding
But
when I
the new
took...
budget, it kind of refunds that, doesn't
Well,
it?
no, it refunds, the only thing it refunds is the money that was blue line last time with Tom Corbett.
So when,
He restores the blue line, but we didn't restore any of the cuts that we've received.
But should you be sitting on a huge pile of cash?
Well,
when we have-
let me explain that to you. Yeah, yes, no, not, what happened was, we had 1,000 employees, we're down to 700. And you can talk to these guys. I am trying to be as efficient as possible, run it as efficiently as possible. We need staff, but we are not replacing people retire. We don't replace them. They doubled up on legislative
Yeah,
assistants. I mean, we've taken steps. We know we're in a jam, and everybody has to run as efficiently as possible. But, we're a separate branch of government, and we have to make sure we can run independently of the executive. So we need the ability to stay open if he decides we have an executive who doesn't want to sign a budget for whatever the reason is. So we need to be able to have a few months, but we're running out.
What do you think? How long do you think you'll have?
I hope to get through August.
Seriously, you think the funding for the General Assembly would run out by August?
House
the
Democrats.
House Democrats.
Yeah, right. So remember, when Mike Turzai switched the funding form, the allocation to proportional, and as I was told, that's the first time that's ever been done. It was always 50-50.
Yes.
If you're in the majority, you might spend down your
You
surplus.
spend more, but yeah.
If you're in the majority, you spend down your surplus. When you're in the minority, you save up your surplus, and recognizing the pendulum tends to swing. And switching to proportional has then sort of bled the Democratic caucus and hemorrhaged its whatever surplus it did have at one point in time, while the Republicans have been able to build up more. And ultimately, that factors into staffing, that factors into everything that it takes to run a legislature.
Ability to compete, yeah.
But it certainly benefits the majority party.
Could you estimate when Republicans would start running out of money?
No. They're in trouble too. I mean, it's not perfect for them, but they're in a little bit better shape than we are.
Okay.
But, we'll do what it takes to get the right thing done for the budget. I mean, that's why we're here. And our view, our caucus priorities, we are in line, and we agree with the governor. We want to fund education, we want to cut property taxes, and we need some jobs and economic development. And this budget, his proposal does all that. So we'll hold out. I mean, I think it's worthwhile. It's important.
Well, I appreciate you coming to talk to us and
That's
taking
great.
the time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. It
Thank
was a
you.
good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.